Preston Byrne. How you doing, man?
I'm all right. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you great, man. This is an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, no, thank you for covering the 4chan issue and the free speech issue so extensively. Your channel was one of the first to pick it up and really has been instrumental in helping get the message out about what's going on with the fight for global free speech. So it's really an honor to come on. And obviously you're friends with my colleague Ron Coleman. So obviously any friend of Ron's is a friend of mine.
Well, I love to hear that. And I'm glad you brought that up proactively, because that was going to be the first thing I brought up with you. Is for full disclosure and transparency here, could you inform people what your relationship is with the law team and what you're doing with Ron in regards to Ofcom and stuff like that currently?
Sure. So I'm a free speech lawyer. I represent websites that have problems with foreign censors. I've been doing that for almost 10 years. And Ron and I have crossed paths in that universe a bunch. And obviously we're in the same part of Twitter. So we're X, as it is now known. And so when I started representing these companies against the British government and their communications regulator, Ofcom, in February and March of this year, and then 4chan became, had an issue and came to us. And we decided that we wanted to bring some litigation in the District of Columbia, the federal courts there. And I'm not a litigator by training, right? I'm a commercial lawyer by training. So really, for me to do that alone would have been unwise, I think, is the right word. And Ron obviously is a very qualified First Amendment litigator. He's argued some of the most important First Amendment precedents, in First Amendment law history, right? Mattel versus Tam. Was a case of his that he took up to the Supreme Court. He represented the plaintiffs in that case. And so I said, listen, this is really important. Do you want to help? And I can't tell, I asked hundreds of lawyers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think, right, this is one of the most important free speech cases and free speech issues, arguably, this issue of the United States and the rest of the world, arguably the future of the entire global internet is going to be decided by the outcome of this international dispute. And you would think, right, that lawyers would be more interested in taking these cases pro bono. But because the early targets of the censorship, right, because censorship never targets popular people, right? It only ever targets unpopular people with unpopular opinions or who are perceived negatively in the marketplace. The easy targets, right, are where they try to go prove the cases. And Ron understands that, right? And he understands that very, very well. And so he volunteered and he said, you know what, we've got to do this because it must be done. And so he and I are working pro bono, representing 4chan and Kiwi Farms in their lawsuit against the UK Office of Communications. I've actually just been spending the last couple of days where we're doing some work on that case at the moment. And without him, it would have been totally impossible for me to do that alone. So Ron has my really undying gratitude as a colleague, because he stepped up when no one else would, and as a result, I think we will talk about what's going on in that case tonight, and also what's happening more widely, because the U.S. federal apparatus is now beginning to get involved in the process of pushing back against foreign censorship. And Ron's work, right, in particular, and on this case, has been a really essential part of convincing the federal government that they do need to get involved. Which has been more my lane, interfacing with them. But without him, we would have much weaker arguments, in making the argument to the federal government that, intervention by the U.S. sovereign power is required, necessary, and essential in order to, secure our perimeter and ensure that the First Amendment survives this really unprecedented global assault. I've had clients now. I've been up against UK Ofcom today. One of my clients got a demand from Australian eSafety. And, I've been up against the Germans before, the Russians, the Brazilians, the French, the New Zealanders, the Singaporeans, everybody. And so, yes, would you like me to read this letter?
Please. Well, that's actually, before you even read it, it was funny because I had this ready to go. And I was going to ask, because it feels like a multi-headed monster that you're battling.
Yeah.
It's the UK, it's the EU, now it's Australia. Like, what the hell is going on?
Let's zoom out, right? So this is all part of a coordinated effort by these countries, right? So the Commonwealth countries and the European Union to enforce their version, right, of how they think the internet should work on a global basis.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been in the works for many, many, many years. And what happened was these countries developed internet regulatory schemes that were fundamentally incompatible with the American way of doing things in the First Amendment. And the theory was that they would be able to they would start rolling these things out. There wouldn't be a lot of opposition. Most of the big tech companies would do what they did with the EU GDPR, right, which is their data protection regulation, and they would comply. And they would get their test cases, they would get their early wins. And then after getting those early wins, they would take the little bits of paper that they got from the early wins, and they would go around and they would say to all the other little countries or all the other little companies in the United States, little ones, big ones, look at this. This is the consequence of what happens, right, if you ignore our orders. And they expected that the targets, right, the first set 4 targets were a mental health forum called SASU, Gab, which is a social network, Kiwi Farms, which is a discussion board, and 4chan, which requires no introduction. And I think they assumed that the companies wouldn't be able to afford competent counsel, or that they wouldn't be able to obtain counsel, right, at any price because they were so politically radioactive. Now, as it happens, the UK had their scheme roll out first. And so they took their scheme, the Online Safety Act 2023, and they said, we're going to try to deploy this one first. And they kind of expected that, again, all of these targets were going to surrender. No one was going to stand up to it. They'd get their early wins, and then they would expand after getting their early wins. Unfortunately for them, they kind of encountered the nightmare scenario, right? Which is that first, the Trump administration, round 2, right, was inaugurated a month before this was scheduled to roll out. They were not expecting that. Second, the Trump administration put censorship right at the top of the list. They started holding hearings in February of this year. They started doing delegations and trips to the UK and the EU, congressmen, diplomats, right off the bat, as soon as they came into office.
Can I interrupt you real quick? Yeah. Because before we go beyond that, what would we be looking at if Trump was not president? If Kamala Harris and the retard in Minnesota got elected there, would we be bending the knee, or would the Constitution be holding up against our president? Like, how does that work? And that's kind of a loaded question before you move on, but maybe like
I have a very specific answer. So the how it would work is that the US government would be actively cooperating with these foreign regimes to serve the notices and demands on American citizens. How I know this is because I'm the only lawyer alive that's actually received one of these demands that was sent through the US Germany Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. They attempted to get Gab to obey their orders starting in 2017, and those orders continued right up through 2024. And the last one was communicated in January of 2025. And as soon as President Trump came into office, we reached out to Congress and some friends of ours in the federal government as well, informed them that this was happening. And guess what? The notices stopped being served. So if we didn't have President Trump in office, and if we didn't have the Trump administration focused on free speech, we would be getting these notices from the Europeans. They would be getting validly served by the State Department and the Justice Department. And these foreign countries would be attempting to project their foreign censorship regimes into the United States. And we know this, right? It was not reported on by anybody, right? Because nobody in the media class cares what happens to a politically disfavored website in relation to an obscure legal process matter. But it was actually
furthers their agenda.
We threatened to sue the federal government over it. And then we looked at, we did the analysis, and then we're like, let's see what happens in the election. And then Trump won, and we're like, you know what? We think it's going to be a better way, rather than suing the DOJ and saying you're violating the Constitution, to just ask the DOJ after President Trump was inaugurated to stop, right? And that is exactly what happened.
Funny how that works.
Well, it's just like, it's amazing, right? It's like, hey, Germany's violating my client's constitutional rights, right? You say to the Biden administration, you send them a 4-page letter, right, explaining everything that's wrong with it, and you say, please stop, and they don't even bother responding. President Trump gets in, you send a 1-line signal message and with an attachment on it, and lo and behold,
we got you, bro.
All of a sudden everything goes away, right? So
funny how that works.
And we sent an email to the House Judiciary Committee attaching the notices, and lo and behold, the problem stopped. So it's one of these things where, yes, if Kamala Harris had been elected, then I think 99% certainty we wouldn't be having this conversation today. There would be no prospect of pushback. And what we're doing now, right, the part of the effort that I'm in, right, there are 2 aspects to it. One of them is to fight, right? Fight everything, fight like crazy, don't cede anything, demonstrate resistance, and thereby embolden other people to resist. The other one that we're going to talk about in a bit is this thing called the GRANITE Act, which is about really just enshrining in statute, carving in stone, a legal principle that the United States doesn't assist foreigners with their inbound censorship demands, and moreover, right, ensuring that Americans can fight back against these demands in the event that there's a change in administration, and framing, right, that law in such terms that it becomes politically radioactive to repeal it at a future date. And so that's what it's a multi-front fight. It involves litigation, it involves publication, right? So one thing that these censors rely on is secrecy. So if they're talking to X or Google or Meta or some company like that, generally speaking, if they've got a problem with what they're doing, what they'll do is they'll have a long, protracted negotiation. The objective from the lawyer's point of view is to reduce the fine in size, or to try to get the fine removed completely and promise to do remedial measures. And we've decided, you know what, we're not going to allow them that secrecy. We're going to publish the notices when they come in. We're going to publish the letters. We're going to publish our responses. We're going to forward every single piece of correspondence we get to the US federal government. We're going to explain to the government what's going on. We're going to make sure that we're a resource at their disposal. I'm working pro bono, so I'm not working as a lobbyist in this matter. And so it's something where we've just said, listen, the only way that we're going to beat this thing, they're relying on inertia, right? Secrecy and threats, right? And so what we're relying on is sunlight, sovereignty, and speed, right? Just the total opposite approach. And the consequence of that, right, has been, just framing the rest of the conversation, one, we have the number of notices that Ofcom has sent to the United States in the last 3 months has trickled almost to a halt. I know because I see them all. So we have managed to scare them off the grass and keep them in England where they belong. And the second thing is we came up with this proposal for a piece of legislation called the GRANITE Act. GRANITE stands for Guaranteeing Rights Against Novel International Tyranny and Extortion. It's a draft law. I wrote it on October the 13th. And basically, it then got picked up by a legislative draftsman, the Deputy Secretary of State in Wyoming. It got introduced as a bill in Wyoming on November 18th or 19th. And now we learn, right, in the news, Undersecretary of State Sarah Rogers flies over to London, gives an interview with GB News, and casually drops on GB News that the House of Representatives is considering it and is on the verge of introducing the GRANITE Act. We don't know what's in it. I haven't seen it, but I'm hoping that it follows the form of the Wyoming law. And what this is it's a censorship shield law, right? And that has gone from blog post to on the verge of introduction in the United States House of Representatives in under 60 days. I think it's been 55 days. So there's a huge amount of momentum right now in the federal government across both the House, the Senate, and the executive branch to get something done as quickly as possible to prevent these foreign intrusions. My hope is that the proposal I came up with is the one that they settle on, not because of any reasons related to vanity or anything like that, although that would be nice, but because I think this is what's necessary, right, and what is actually going to work. And we're getting some very encouraging noises. So if you'll scroll down a bit, you'll see the tweet from Senator Eric Schmidt. So Senator Schmidt, who's a diehard free speech defender in the Senate, it basically said right here, you see, I'm working on legislation to protect American speech from foreign subversion. He's on Senate Judiciary, which is, obviously they talk a lot to House Judiciary, and House Judiciary has said they're introducing GRANITE. I don't know what he's going to introduce, call it, but he's clearly working on something. And then you see Secretary Rubio, right, the quote tweet there. The days of censoring Americans online are over, right? And again, I don't have any inside knowledge on this. They don't tell me very much. But what I would say is if the Secretary of State of the United States is saying something like that, I think that everyone in the federal government by now is probably singing off the same hymn sheet, and they're probably developing a battle plan and figuring out how to deploy it in the most efficient fashion. So essentially, we've gone from a position where a year ago, these notices started to come into the United States. I was the only guy on the ground. 6 months ago, Ron got involved. We brought our lawsuit in DC. The lawsuit served multiple functions, right? First and foremost, to assert our clients' claims and defenses. And we do have claims and defenses, and we're going to be fighting really as hard as we can to win in that case. And then in addition to that, though, the function that the lawsuit served was to educate American lawyers, because we go through and examine in exhaustive detail all of the ways in which the UK's Online Safety Act, I'm an English lawyer and an American lawyer, but all the ways that the English Online Safety Act and the free speech, law assumptions there are they're trying to export those things into the United States to educate American lawyers about the nature of the problem, right? And the nature of the difficulty of fighting back, which is all obvious from the docket. So it's been a multi-front approach of educating the American bar, educating federal politicians, getting the other side, chiefly the UK Ofcom, to make some politically damaging admissions. For example, they invoked sovereign immunity as a defense. That was the motion they filed last week. So they basically said, listen, we're not, the UK runs around Keir Starmer runs around saying, oh, no, we're not pushing around Americans. We're not trying to censor Americans on American soil. And then his censorship agency says, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to invoke sovereign immunity and the sovereign power of the British government in order to continue to allow ourselves to censor Americans on American soil. So your law and your sovereign immunities laws don't matter. They matter when we need it, right? But your law, specifically your First Amendment, doesn't matter when you need it. And so I think in aggregate, when you look at all of these factors, taken together, the note, the fine, and then of course the fine, right, against X from the EU happened on Friday last week, and that I think they were expecting that the U.S. hadn't really figured out its position on this yet and didn't really know what it wanted to do. But what they hadn't seen is that people have been scrambling furiously behind the scenes for the last 11 months, trying to get the federal government to move off the plate. And we've been developing documentary records, which we've been presenting to the federal government. We've been sending every piece of correspondence to the federal government. We've been showing the arguments we're making to the UK. Every email I sent, including the email that was just sent to eSafety a couple hours ago, every email I send always has probably about a dozen inboxes on blind copy from various government agencies in the federal government and in the states. And so we're making sure that our decision makers are apprised, and based on the noises that we're seeing, and again, they don't tell me anything because I'm not one of them, but based on the noises that we're seeing publicly, I think that we've successfully argued our case before, exercising our petition rights under the First Amendment. I think that we've successfully convinced the federal government that this is a major strategic threat to the United States if we allow it to continue. And I'm extremely, there are two ways you can approach it, right? If you follow my Twitter account 6 months ago, I was calling for Congress to do something. I was calling for the executive to intervene. I'm not calling for them to do anything anymore. I'm confident that they will. And so it's a great position to be in as an advocate, right? Because you can take your foot off the gas and not pressure your representatives anymore, because you think, I believe that they're going to do something about this. And now the question is, now that we reasonably expect that there's going to be federal action, and I've had that suspicion probably for about 3 or 4 weeks now that federal action is imminent. So because I was so close to the process, I have a slightly better idea of what they're thinking than I think the general public does.
Well, you think the Twitter fine probably put it over the edge too?
I think the Twitter fine, it was like throwing a match onto a pile of fireworks. Kaboom! Because the U.S. is already. I think the EU is gambling. I think they thought to themselves, well, we'll issue the fine notice in December. The U.S. won't have responded yet. They won't understand what's going on. They'll have to reach a position, and they're not going to get anything done before the midterms, at which point the GOP is probably going to get turfed out of power. They're 12 months too late. Right. I think the position's locked in. I think the negotiating position's locked in. I think they've seen everything they've needed to see. And then when the EU decided to do what it did, it just confirmed, right, for everybody who has been participating in that process, that this isn't going to stop unless Congress makes it stop, or unless the executive branch figures out a way to make it stop. So
let me interrupt you one more time too, because the audacity of the EU to move forward with this fine has got to make you wonder, they know they got nothing and they're still moving forward with it. So what's their like, you're thinking chess moves, three moves ahead. Why would they do this if they know they got nothing with it? What are they planning?
They don't know they've got nothing. They think
they really thought this was like a legitimate thing.
So this arises from competing and differing understandings of what free speech means, right? In the UK, they say this is, in the UK, I've got UK on the brain. In the EU, they have their free speech in the EU means something very different than what it means in the United States. It's heavily qualified, it's heavily contingent, and it's easily waived if the government just says, listen, we think this priority is more important than your free speech rights. That's Article 10 sub 2 of the European Convention. So from their point of view, what they're doing is transparency, right? They're saying, well, your blue check mark, that design we think is misleading. And so as a consequence, we're going to fine you for that. Or, the fact that you're not exposing your data to researchers so that those researchers can scrape the information on your site and then write academic articles about you. And it's this totally bullshit, and totally bullshit and nonsense disinformation academia, right? Just basically academics, people with PhDs who are chronically online and just write about shit posting and put it in a long form format so they can justify their existence by publishing papers. And so they can criticize you, right? And call for further regulations. In the United States, you have a right to refuse that, right? You have a right to publish whatever you want. You have a right to say a blue check means whatever you want it to mean. And you have a right to refuse inspection of your records by a third party who is only getting those records because the government wants them to write hit pieces on you. And so from our perspective, we look at that, and it is a free speech problem. The EU, the Europeans, they look at it and they say, this isn't a free speech problem because the terms mean two very different things in the very different places. But I think the EU thought that the US response was nowhere near fully baked and that we didn't have any clue as to how we were going to deal with this. Now, I can't speak for Congress, right? I don't know what Congress is going to do. I haven't seen a copy of the bill. I have a pretty good hunch that they disapprove of this very strongly, and I have a pretty good hunch that they have a firm idea of what needs to be done, but I don't know what they're going to do, right? So I'm not going to pontificate on hunches. What I will say is that if they copy our approach that we've had in Wyoming, right, and soon New Hampshire, the bill that we've drafted, basically what it does is it delineates, for the purposes of U.S. law, right, it specifies what sovereign zone of influence we regard, right, as ours, which is supposed to be free from foreign intrusion. And what it does is it puts a European government on equal footing with the U.S. government, right, in that the U.S. government is not allowed to infringe on Americans' First Amendment rights. And similarly, an EU government should not be allowed, or a UK government or the Australian government shouldn't be allowed to infringe on Americans' First Amendment rights. And what it does is it has three operative provisions. The first one is that it creates a shield, and it confirms in statute the existing judge-made rule that a foreign order which is unconstitutional because it infringes on free speech is not enforceable in the United States. At the moment, that rule is contained in a dozen cases in a dozen different places. And so if you want to make the argument, you have to write a big memo about it, and you have to send a memo off to the other side and make your argument, but it's not entirely clear. This just is really simple. It says, listen, this statute says your order is not enforceable here, go away. The second thing it does is it prohibits U.S. government agencies, or in the case of the Wyoming bill, Wyoming government agencies' cooperation with foreign censorship orders. You can't give effect to them. You can't serve them. You can't give them, any respect in a U.S. court, all the rest of it. And there's a penalty in the Wyoming bill for assisting a foreign government with an American citizen. So that's what we call the shield, right? So there are a couple of different ways you can describe it. I like calling it the Death Star. Some people call it an atomic bomb. Depends on how you want to do it, but we'll, use your own conclusions. People will call it what it is. And so the shield piece, the states can enact that on their own, right? They don't need any federal permission to do that. Now there's a sword piece, or as I call it in the Death Star analogy, the turbo laser, right? And what the turbo laser does is it allows an American who's received a threat from a foreign government to sue the foreign government and the foreign agency and any individual involved in issuing that decision in a civil action in a Wyoming court for titanic quantities of damages. So it is the greater of 3 times your actual damages, or $10 million per threat per instance that's communicated to you, or 3 times the amount of the threatened fine, right? So now for context, if you, for example, let's go with 4chan as the example, the maximum fine they threatened 4chan with was about $25 million. So for it, just sending the threat, just communicating, we're going to do something to you because of your First Amendment rights would have created a $75 million cause of action under the one of the headings. And because there were 6 letters involved, it's $10 million per letter, per threat, per communication. That's 60 million, right? And so you get to pick the greater, right, of those two things in your damages calculation. In the case of a company like Meta, it's either the threat is either $25 million or 10% of their global revenue under the UK Online Safety Act. Meta makes $164 billion a year, or they don't make that. That's their worldwide turnover. So 10% of that is 16.4 billion. You multiply that by 3, it's 49.2 billion. So if they sent Meta a threat saying you must censor your website because of us, Meta would be able to sue them in Wyoming court for $49.2 billion, which is roughly equal to the amount of British sovereign assets custodied at American banks. So essentially what that would require is for the UK to then pull its assets out of those banks, assuming they hadn't been frozen by an order that Meta had served. But like, I don't think it's ever going to get that far. I think if you have a law like that on the books, right, where you say, listen, your efforts to enforce this against American citizens are going to be fruitless necessarily. Moreover, any attempt to enforce your foreign censorship codes on an American, right, or who's entitled to First Amendment protections, which will be any tech company that is headquartered in the United States, will result in such titanic retaliation that you will effectively lose access to the US financial system as a result. So I think, right, that creates kind of a mutually assured destruction dynamic.
Yep.
Where any American company, right, essentially has a dead hand device where if a foreign government seeks to enforce a censorship order against that company, the company can then pull the trigger, and yes, they'll lose access to Europe, but the foreign country will lose access to the international capital markets. And so I think what will happen, right, is that you're not going to have like a lot of my lawyer friends are like, this would be amazing. You know, we'd run around, we'd sue every European country in the world. I think what would happen, I don't think that's what would happen. I think what would happen is that because the attempted enforcement against an American company would be politically suicidal, they will simply not attempt to enforce. Because they'll do the math and they'll say, well, is it worth decoupling from the United States and not having a working currency? Or do we just stop censoring the United States and rely on voluntary cooperation by the larger platforms like Meta and Google and Microsoft and X, most of which will voluntarily comply with most local rules in order to avoid this civil damages turbo laser? So that's what we propose for Wyoming. It's called the GRANITE Act, as I said. We know that Congress has seen it. We know that Congress is considering something called the GRANITE Act, specifically the House of Representatives. We don't know, right, what is in it because I haven't seen it. And I don't expect that I'm going to see it until it's introduced, right? So that's that. And essentially, if we pull this off, if we can get a law like that on the books, it would be the biggest victory for free speech since Section 230, so in 30 years. And in addition to that, it would permanently, or at least for the remainder of our natural lives, it would rewrite the rules of the road for the internet for every person on planet Earth, because it would allow anybody to get into an American server, access that American server, use American web infrastructure on the terms permitted by the First Amendment, and any foreign government that sought to intrude on that would essentially risk a thermonuclear legal response, which would be, U.S. federal courts and U.S. trial lawyers are very, very scary things on a global basis. And so you do not want to have a money judgment against you in a U.S. federal court, because if anything moves through the United States, it can be seized and attached. And I don't think, to be blunt, that Europe wants to decouple from the most advanced economy in the world that is more values and ideologically aligned with Europe than something like Russia or China. And which historically, right, is responsible for the continent's defense. And they have tried everything, right? They've tried reasoning, they've tried diplomacy, they've tried negotiation, they've threatened tariffs. None of that has worked. And so as a consequence, I think now the federal government is saying, okay, well, carrot is over. Now it's time for the stick. And that's what we've been pushing for now for 11 months. The litigation played an important role in demonstrating the type of uphill climb that a U.S. litigant has. It also demonstrated, right, for Washington, which was watching that case very closely, exactly what the foreigners think about us, right? I'm not going to get into too much detail about it, but Ofcom sent a letter for example, to 4chan on October 13th, in which they told 4chan, you don't have First Amendment rights. Your First Amendment rights don't protect you from us. We do have the right to enforce our law on U.S. soil, which, according to English legal doctrine, is correct. Parliament can legislate that the moon is made of cheese, right? And Parliament can pass a law tomorrow saying everyone must,
well, in a weird way, isn't it kind of like the U.S. is like, how many times we have to teach this lesson, you old man? Like,
Yeah,
didn't we already do this before we were even born? Are we doing this again with you?
Well, that's international politics. Countries try to get away with what they can. It's been interesting to see how the Europeans have reacted to the Granite proposal, because they say, well, oh, that's fine, we'll just seize your assets right back. And it's like, really, you really want to start that with the United States? Like, do you really? Is that really in your interest to do? And so I think that hopefully the Granite proposal, I think that it came as a huge surprise to the European Union, to the UK, and now to Australia, which presumably now, I imagine all these regulators are absolutely sick of me at this point, because I keep coming up on every case.
I refuse to believe they're this retarded, though. Like, I keep thinking they got to be thinking one step ahead beyond this, and they're doing this for a greater purpose that we don't know about yet. But the more I see things happen, the more I'm like, maybe they are just retarded. Maybe it's
getting outmaneuvered by two guys working nights and weekends for free.
Right.
So they're getting out. I mean, while Ofcom was sending letters and writing reports, we managed to get blog posts to Bill, right? 3 guys were involved in that. Myself, Ron, and Colin Crossman, who's the Deputy Secretary of State in Wyoming. So 3 guys working part-time for free, right, have managed to figure out what the weak points are, right, in their attack, get them to make politically damaging admissions, create the documentary record to get Congress on board. And in addition to that, it seems that we may well have gotten Congress on board, and we're preparing to re-architect, right, the entire legal structure of the internet. And we've got full buy-in from the executive branch and possibly buy-in from both houses of Congress. So, and we've managed to do the latter piece of that. Obviously the preparatory work was over the course of the last 11 months, providing all of this intelligence to the U.S. government and ensuring that they knew what was going on, right? Because if a company gets contacted by Ofcom and they resolve it with Ofcom or the Australian E-Safety Commissioner or the EU Commission in secret without looping in the government, then the government doesn't know what the problem is. Mm-hmm. We said, no, none of that. And the decision was made. And some of my clients, to be blunt, some of them make me a little uncomfortable, right? I'm not going to say which ones, just for sake of argument, but or for sake of the discussion, but they need to be defended, right? And it is a critical national interest that any inbound to the United States, regardless of source, right, gets forwarded to the people who are responsible for, as the custodians of the United States sovereign power, so that they can make an informed decision about how that power needs to be used. And so I made the decision. It doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter how controversial they are. They will be defended, right? And they will be defended competently. And we will make sure that all of that information gets into the hands of the federal government. I mean, an email lands in my inbox from one of these foreign censors. I read it. The government has it within 3 minutes. As soon as I'm done digesting it, understanding it, familiarizing myself with its contents, the minute that happens, forward, send, then we reply, and we copy everybody on the reply. So they've got the full record, basically, of every censorship attempt known into the United States.
I got on that note, I got a kick out of when you posted the confidential stuff from Ofcom, and just here's what they sent me.
I mean, I did some homework before doing that. There was no legal obligation anywhere to keep it confidential,
right?
So it wasn't under seal. There's no court order violated. So it's like, all right, well, they've asked us to keep it confidential. All right. Noted. If you want to keep your thoughts confidential, don't send it to American citizens who are in the business, who are currently, and I didn't tell this to them at the time, but the mission at the time, and the mission has always been, I think a lot of people in London thought I was a crank when this first started, because we said, okay, we're going to sue federal court in DC. Mm-hmm. And there were a bunch of law firms that cranked out client notes and things being like, this case could decide the future of the internet. It's like, no, this case isn't going to decide shit. It's a declaratory judgment action over whether a company was validly served by email. And yes, it will be part of the matrix, right? But it's not going to solve the problem. What solves the problem is getting Congress off the plate and getting them involved, because if Congress lifts their pinky finger, this ends instantly. Right? They have so much power, and the United States has so much power that if it chooses to structure that power in a particular way, which makes censorship impossible, then censorship becomes impossible.
Do you wonder if members of Congress are compromised?
No,
not at all. None of them.
I mean, maybe, but not by the UK
or the World Economic Forum. I mean,
No,
tinfoil hat shit, but
it's not,
no.
that's not my wheelhouse.
No, okay. I wanted to ask just in case you got any vibes like that, but
So far, to be honest, the whole process has very much restored my faith in government.
wow,
Weirdly.
that's
Yeah.
actually
I mean,
the best news I've heard from this entire conversation.
yeah, I am a diehard anti-government libertarian, right? Like, I do not like the government. I do not like paying taxes. I don't like any of it, right?
No wonder you and I get along so well.
Exactly. But the response that I've seen from the Trump administration has been humbling, because I'm just a guy, right? I have no political power. I work out of my house, right? I work out of my house. I have a small dog. I'm married. It's great. I live a peaceful life, right, out in the countryside, and I don't have any influence whatsoever. And they listened. They have been listening, and they continue to listen. The issue is so important to them that they've been very open and said, listen, don't feel afraid to contact us about this. We want to know, right? We want to know what's going on. We appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate what Ron's doing. And, we think that this is a matter of critical national importance. And they have been that way, even when nobody's watching. I think there was a huge explosion of interest in this issue when X was fined on Friday afternoon. But there are people behind the scenes. They've been working on this for nearly a year. So it's been humbling. It's been a fascinating experience, because I usually don't have any interaction with government whatsoever in my day-to-day work. And they've been really on the ball, to be honest with you. And I think they're moving, and I don't know any of this, right? Because I don't know any of this. My hunch is that they're about to move at very high speed. And so we will see what happens next. But the sense that I get is that they recognize this as a problem. They recognize that there's a very narrow window in which to solve this problem, and that there is a solution which can solve it more or less permanently. And I think that they're going to try to get it done. So it's been the most incredible professional experience of my life, to be honest with you. It's not done yet. We haven't won yet, but I think we're damn close.
Well, it's extremely inspirational, dare I say, almost documentary movie-esque, depending on where this ends, of how, I mean, you, I'm sure, saw my video covering the GRANITE Act when I talked about it, because after I published that, that's when we started talking about getting you on here. And I'm like, towards the end of covering that, I was just like, fuck yeah, America, let's go. Like, it was like very inspirational, the direction you took. And what you just said a couple minutes ago, I think everybody listening could take from. And that is like, you were just like a dude. You're like, I'm just a dude. I do this as law, this, that, the other thing. And the United States government is looking to you for information on this. And I mean, I've learned that in my own walk of life, just doing YouTube. I'm like, I'm just a dude. And it kind of feels like, as long as you're taking initiative in this world to do right, do better, learn about a situation, people will look to you as almost like the authority on something, because they want information from someone who lives in that world, because the world is so multifaceted on so many different areas.
Everybody thought that this problem was unsolvable, right? And a handful of us, myself, Ron, Colin, and a couple of state reps in New Hampshire, basically. It's determined. It's been interesting. It's been interesting how few people. Everyone cheers you on, right? And I am immensely grateful for the support that I've received. And there have been a couple of people who stuck their hands up and said, "How can I volunteer?" But at the end of the day, what really needed to happen in this particular fight was that we needed a single central source of information to make sense of what was going on, then brief the federales on exactly what was happening, and ensure that they were getting information in a structured way, right? So when you're the first one out the gate to do it, because I've been dealing with this for a long time, I remember a phone call Ron and I had with some other lawyers who were considering getting involved in the case. And I was like, listen, I don't have to lead the litigation. And Ron looked over, he's like, no, yes, you do. Like, this is like you're the guy. Like, my continued involvement.
Don't back out now.
Yeah, my continued involvement in this is dependent on the fact that you're quarterbacking it. So no, you do not get to just like hand this off and you deal with it. And so I was like, all right, because I was like, shit, like that's going to be a lot of work. And it has been like, my poor wife has been widowed, right? Because I've been working on this, and and it's consumed so much time. But ultimately, what it needed was someone to stand up to all of the censors, and be the guy, right, to organize it and run it, just like a case, just like any other piece of litigation, just like any other legal fight. And you can do that with surprisingly few lawyers, right? You can win the biggest fights with the smallest teams, as long as you know what you're doing, right, and you have a battle plan, and you execute that battle plan, and then you don't reveal, right, what you're up to, which I now have, right. I've now communicated, because I want the UK to know, right. I want them to know that I want them to. It's like the line, Tyrell, right, from Game of Thrones. I want them to know it was me, right. I want them to, so, and I think now that when our Undersecretary of State flew over to London and started mentioning my act in their backyard, I think they've probably figured it out. So it was not a haphazard operation. It has been very meticulously planned for a very long time and very deliberately. And now we're starting to see the federal movement. And honestly, like, once the feds start moving, hands off, right? There's not a whole lot left for me to do, except to make sure that we get more information, relevant information, all of which, to be blunt, is just corroborating everything that we've learned over the last 12 months, which is that foreign censors will send letters to Americans. They won't follow established treaty procedures. They won't get letters rogatory. They will not respect U.S. law, and they'll send threats of fines, arrest, imprisonment. In all cases, we're looking at 7, 8, 9-figure numbers that are getting communicated to American citizens, and they'll do it with impunity, right? And they'll do it because their domestic law says they can, and they have no respect for our law or our sovereignty or our independence. And so I think that they've been convinced, and now that the ball's moving on their side, great. Like, I think the only thing really to do is sit back and see if they can close the deal. And I'm pretty sure that they can. And once that deal is then closed, then there's some more legal stuff to happen afterwards, because then you've got a new world order, right? I know you're talking about the new world order, of course, here in the general sense, not the conspiratorial sense, where you have a set of rules, and those rules need to be understood and interpreted. And, we'll understand and interpret them and work on new problems as they come up over time. But for now, it's squarely in the hands of the government. The messaging that we've got from the U.S. government is that a response is coming. I wish I knew what it was. If I did happen to know what that response was going to be, I'd lie, and I wouldn't tell you what it is. But but incidentally, I don't know what it's going to be, so I can.
Or do you?
Or no, I don't. I don't. They have been very good about. I'm counsel on an active active case. They really don't tell me a whole lot. So what I can glean from the situation is very much looking at shadows, right, and reflections, and drawing conclusions based on what I know, right, about what they know, and then reaching conclusions of my own. But in fact, I know nothing concretely. But what I do know is that the rhetoric from the administration and the messaging from the administration indicates that the behavior that they've seen from the United Kingdom will not be tolerated. I mean, Sarah Rogers she flew over to London, and she said, this is a non-starter, censoring Americans. It is a non-starter. It is a deal breaker. It is a red line, right? Senior diplomats don't say that unless it's a red line, right? And so and the State Department doesn't run its mouth, just because they are running on a script. They've been given their marching orders. I think the executive branch knows what it wants to do, and it's just a question now of moving towards implementation. And how they implement that, of course, is a matter for them to decide and not for me to decide. So I'm no longer calling for them to act. I'm very sure that action is coming. What form it takes and what they do, I'm just a solo practitioner on the front lines. I've given them my opinion, and it's their decision. They have other considerations that they need to take into account. So it may be right that they reach different conclusions about what needs to be done here than I do, because they're dealing with a different problem set than I am. But I've done my bit. I've contributed, and now it's really just wait and see to see what happens next.
You've done more than anyone could have ever asked for. I've been following you on X for a few months now, and always extremely insightful and an incredible follow. I'm impressed by the amount of just the tweets with info, details, links, sources, and what you're talking about, and the legitimacy and logic behind it is very,
I've been working on the problem of free speech in England and Wales and the transatlantic dimensions, of that issue since 2012. So I've written papers on it. I did my law, when I got requalified as a U.S. lawyer, I did my writing requirement on EU and U.S. free speech. So this for me has been the last 14 years, and so it has. So is it, and I'm dual qualified in England and the United States, right? So
Yep.
it's what they're Ofcom kind of walked into the absolute nightmare scenario, right? Which is
they got cocky. I think they thought they were able to push their own citizens around, so they're like, time to start pushing other countries around because no one can tell us no.
And they also bumped into a lawyer who they didn't think existed, which was a dual qualified free speech radical who happened to be dealing with it, who's the only lawyer in the United States who has dealt with an inbound, foreign MLAT request in the last 10 years pertaining to protected speech, right? So like already knew the issues, already knew the problems. I have been quietly seething, right, in quietly seething in my house for the last 5 years, right, grumbling about all of these problems and ruminating at great length on how to fix them. And so, when the proverbial hit the fan, and we had the EU, the UK, and Australia coming at the United States all at once, I knew what the playbook was, right, and we ran it. And so, and we continue to run it, right, with Australia. I mean, you'll have seen the email I sent to them was about as disrespectful as an attorney's email.
To that point, that's actually what I wanted to get back to is, could you explain this and what this has anything to do with the UK and EU and why it's coming from Australia right now, and what is happening? What is this?
Yeah, so the Australians have their own Online Safety Act, and just like the UK has an Online Safety Act, the operative provisions are very similar, but it has a uniquely Australian flavor, different numbers, things like that. And they've started their social media ban and their enforcement procedures go live, I think, later this week or the 9th of December, or today, 9th of December. So their enforcement process goes live today. And so they sent out a preliminary letter
to that point. Here you go. Australia's U16 social media ban starts in less than 48 hours. Mandatory age checks, regardless of age, to use search engines begins in less than 20 days, 27th of December. This is what happened in Nepal when the government temporarily banned social media. Power of the people.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to suggest open revolt against the Australians, but
no, not saying you're suggesting it, but this is historically what has happened when this kind of stuff comes into play.
So their new laws coming online. They've got their new toy. Ofcom's new toy came online in January of this year. And we had lots of back and forth with Ofcom, and we sued them in the district. So we sued them and all that jazz. And it didn't work, right? And then the EU's fine came online, and they went after X, and it's to be determined whether that works or not. And Australia has decided that they're going to see if they have any better luck than the UK did with their law, and we're going to give them the same answer we gave the UK, which is go to hell. And we're not in Australia. America declared its independence from the United Kingdom of Great Britain in 1776, and we've been a free and independent country for 249 years since then. And we're not following your orders. Sorry. And if you want to get an order into the United States, this is how you do it. And you understand what those procedures are. And just because you pass some stupid domestic law which ignores those procedures, exactly, right? American flag.
No. Like it even says 1776 under it.
Yeah, like so they enacted a domestic law. And the objective, right, that we have is to humiliate them, right? It is not simply to say no. It's not to betray. And their communication from a legal perspective is deeply unserious because it doesn't comply with any of the established public international law conventions that you would normally expect to get an order domesticated in another country. So what they did instead is they sent an email to this unnamed, I'm not going to name the client at this juncture, and they sent an email to the unnamed client. They had the word official at the top in Arial, in bright red and bold. And so I responded to them. And so that is that. And I said, I thank you for your email with the word official stamped at the top in bright red, as if sending emails to U.S. citizens, which threaten them with $49.2 million Australian, 1999 American fines for nothing more than the free exercise of their constitutional rights, somehow exempts your agency from the requirement to utilize an international treaty procedure or letters rogatory, which are letters between various courts in different jurisdictions, before serving official correspondence on American citizens. You may be interested to learn that there is no all caps exception in the Hague Service Convention. which is the convention dealing with the service of process across borders, of which we and Australia are both signatories.
Okay.
My client will not be cooperating with your investigation because my client is American, not Australian. My client has First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment rights and will give you the same answer it gave the UK's Ofcom, mutatis mutandis. It doesn't take orders from Australia, right? We fought a war with Australia's predecessor state, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, to settle that question. Now, usually what would happen here is I would attach a letter, right, as I did with Ofcom, 5 to 10 pages long, explaining exactly what the issue is. I have gotten so tired of doing this, and I wanted to go watch a K-drama with my wife that I decided that on this occasion, I wasn't going to do that, right? So my pet hamster, Mr. Whiskers, obviously usually occupies my attention, but my wife has recently gotten jealous of my spending so much time with Mr. Whiskers. And so she said, listen, I know you and Mr. Whiskers have fun with Ofcom, but this time you and Mr. Whiskers, you're not to write an email with Mr. Whiskers to the Australians. So I said, Mr. Whiskers, I'm really sorry. So when Ofcom, for context for your listeners who aren't aware, when Ofcom sent their fine notice to 4chan, I responded and said, thanks so much for your fine notice. It'll make excellent bedding for my pet hamster. In other words, I'm going to thread it, right? And I'm going to put it in my pet hamster's enclosure. And, it was a joke, right? But it was a joke that made a serious point, which is that if they had actually served us with a summons, right, and they'd adhered to the process, destruction of a summons is a very big deal. You're not supposed to do that. So we can shred their letters because their letters are not summonses, right? Their letters are emails, and emails are not enough to bind an American citizen. But on this occasion, Mr. Whiskers had to stay in his cage because I had other things to do. So I said, listen, I would explain the applicable law, which Australia, they fucking know the applicable law. They know it very well. The e-safety commissioner is an American. She worked at X or Twitter before it was X.
Yeah, she's from America. Yeah,
from America. Julie, from America. She's betraying her country.
Yeah,
and it's
Julie something. England Grant. Yeah,
and it is morally repugnant that she's doing so. So they know what the law.
Well, she's a Karen. She's a Karen.
I'm not going to say. I don't.
No, you don't have to. I will.
But she's not a Karen. She's a traitor. To be honest, and that I think what
even worse than a
fellow American citizens is vile. So,
yeah.
I would explain the applicable law, but unfortunately, I have to go upstairs and watch the hit 2009 K-drama "Boys Over Flowers." Very entertaining. It was the original K-drama, right? So all later K-dramas really follow that framework. It is ridiculous. It is fun, and I wanted the Australians to know this is a good show, and if you haven't seen it, you need to go watch it. So, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, really top quality stuff. Unfortunately, this means that unlike your English colleagues over at Ofcom, I don't have time this evening to provide you with the complete explanation. Oh, we just lost the window.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought you were telling the story about.
Oh, yeah, no. It was just, finishing the email.
My bad.
Complete explanation of how fruitless this fishing expedition is going to be for you. I'm sure the UK can provide you with a copy of the various letters we sent to them or a copy of the lawsuit that this law firm served on them if you're curious. I've also published those letters, like I'll be publishing this one within 60 seconds of hitting send. In the meantime, if you require U.S. legal advice on constitutional basics, I'm sure there's a first-year law student somewhere who can explain to you how the First Amendment works. I blind copy officials in several departments of the government in the United States and government officials in multiple U.S. states. They've been provided with copies of your demands. They were sent those demands shortly before I typed up this email. My client reserves all rights, Preston Byrne, and go to hell. We're not obeying your orders. We don't have to. It is legally, it is preposterous that they are sending these things into the United States. And if they wanted to get serious with my clients, there is a way for them to do that, which is they can adhere to an international process, they can serve their orders, and they can allow my clients the opportunity, right? Or in the alternative, they can sue them in the United States, and they can allow my clients the opportunity to be heard before an American judge and have a merits decision, a merits hearing on whether these orders are enforceable here, which they're not. And
right.
The reason they are not affording American citizens those rights, because they know that if they tried to enforce it here through the usual channels, they'd lose. And so what they're doing instead is they're sending these ridiculous letters, which have no legal force in the United States, and they're trying to intimidate American citizens out of the free exercise of their rights. And we're not going to stand for it. And we're going to make sure that if this is what they want to do, if this is really how they want to play it, while we wait for Congress to get involved and while we wait for the executive branch to get involved, and we're very confident that they will, We are going to make this as politically costly for them as it possibly can be. We're going to embarrass them. We're going to reject their authority. We're going to reject the authority of their laws. And the reason we're going to do it is because their laws have no binding force in the United States. And every time they try to enforce it, every rejection weakens, right, their ability to enforce it or threaten or intimidate somebody else. And it's because different countries have different laws, and that's the end of it. And they want to behave like Australia's laws should govern conduct in the United States. If Australia doesn't want this website accessible in Australia, there's a very easy option they have. They can put a censorship box over their pipes and they can block it. That's what they can do. But this business where they turn around and threaten Americans with fines and jail time has to stop. It's really scary for small websites to receive a demand like this because they get it. It's a huge fine. The enemy, the other side is in many cases a nuclear armed G7 member state. In some cases, like Australia's, it's a very major international economy. You have to start worrying about how you're going to travel, things like that. So they're trying to bully American citizens. We think it should stop. And we think in the GRANITE Act proposal that we've come up with that we have a mechanism which will bring that behavior to a halt because it imposes incredible penalties for communicating these kinds of threats or attempting to enforce these laws against American citizens. In case you can't tell, I get very animated about this.
Oh, right? No, I can tell. I just keep going back to the Julia Grant is an American-born Australian public servant currently employed as the e-safety commissioner. This is all sorts of fucked up. Like, what? Why? How?
I mean, I think she's a dual national. And so obviously you're free to move to Australia and do what you want. But
but why would you move to another country and then openly attack the country that you're from? It's very
because you believe, I think these people believe that internet censorship is good and they convince themselves. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and they say, I want to be evil today. Right. Or maybe there are people who do. I certainly do.
I think evil is evil and good is a matter of perspective. And I think that's what trips people up is everyone's good in their own story. You know what I mean?
Everyone maybe, but like in Inman Grant's case, the fact that she's an American citizen, she knows what the rules are here. And she worked in policy at Twitter. She knows how all of this works and is supposed to work. And she said, you know what? I wield sovereign authority from Australia. I'm going to have a punt, right? I'm going to go take a punt on this and try to see if I can get my rules enforced over there anyway, even though, right, there's no reason why. She's probably even been advised, right, by government counsel in Australia, that's how this works. But remember, all of these regimes are coming online at the same time. 4chan's first fine, the first fine notice ever issued under the UK Online Safety Act was in October 13th. Then we've got the Australians rolling out their scheme beginning of December. EU's first fine decision, December 5th. They were hoping that the combined pressure of those three institutions, those three sovereigns, the UK, Australia, and the EU, would be able to pressure Americans into collapsing, right? There would be so much external pressure that they would get control of the internet, and their rules, which are largely harmonized with one another, would then govern the way that the global internet and the American internet works.
And this has been building up for years too. This didn't happen overnight. They've been coordinating this, trying to get this together for a while.
5 years. They've been working.
5 years. And ironically, I think you'd agree with this. All this work is for naught because no matter how many times they all coordinatedly come at us, we still just laugh, say, no, it doesn't matter how many
they're this close. Don't make no mistake. They are this close to winning.
What?
They're this close to winning, but then again, so are we, right? So we stand on the knife edge, right? Where if the United States government doesn't credibly respond to this, what will happen is the larger companies are all going to comply by default. They can all afford to comply by default. And then what will happen is they'll pick off the smaller companies one by one by pressuring them and blocking them or fining them or threatening them with arrest and everything else. And eventually they'll win. We are on the knife edge as we speak, right? Now, it didn't look like we were on the knife edge before. Before it looked like we were way off the knife and that all of this was inevitable. Now that we're seeing federal pushback, we're back in the middle again. And what the U.S. federal government does in the next 2 to 3 weeks will determine how this goes. To be blunt, I mean, we are right. History is pivoting around this point. Like
this is massive.
The future of the global internet We are all living through it. And right now we're at the pivot point. And so if the United States government can organize, get a bill enacted, the bill is strong enough, right, to deter this conduct, then we've pushed back, right? We've reasserted our perimeter. We've said that no one's going to get in. And if you do try to get in, the penalties on you are going to be enormous. So don't try it, and we'll deter the conduct. And then what we can do is we continue. I'm a free speech activist, right? Protecting the United States in this fight is not the destination, right? It is the first step. The destination is the liberation of Europe, right? It is restoring free speech to the peoples of Europe, ensuring that European people can speak their minds, ensuring that the UK returns to its free speech tradition, which hasn't been great, right? But it's certainly been a lot better than it is today.
What it is now, yeah.
And so, I mean, I've lived through it. Right?
Speaking of, did you see that? I'm sure you did. This was going viral today. Let me bring this up real quick because I wanted to share. It's 20 seconds.
Yep.
In the UK, I'm sure you saw this. This was.
Oh yeah.
UK judge hands Joey Barton a 6-month prison sentence over offensive social media posts. It's 23 seconds. Let me just play it out here.
Counts 2 and 4, the racially aggravated offences, there will be custodial terms of 6 months, and on count 6, 8, 9, and 10, custodial terms of 4 months, all such terms to run concurrently, and all suspended for a period of 18 months. If during that 18-month period you commit any further counts 2.
Tell me, when you hear that, what are you thinking when you hear that?
So I haven't looked at the ruling, but if it's for offensive social media posts, that'll be under Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003, which criminalizes grossly offensive social media or grossly offensive online communications. Grossly offensive, the difference between that and offensive is whether a judge thinks you should go to jail over that tier of offensive. It is just run-of-the-mill offensive speech. Virtually all of it that you see people convicted for in the United Kingdom would be constitutionally protected in the United States. There are categories of speech in the UK which you can get jailed for, which are not constitutionally protected in the United States. For example, harassment, right, or harassment as we call it. But there, right, you sometimes see the Protection from Harassment Statute, Protection from Harassment Act 1997, used to punish constitutionally protected speech. So
I'm going through right now with someone, so I'm very familiar with that one.
Yes, I mean it's one of those things where, you know, yes, to the American mind, you look at something like this and you go, this is unbelievable, and it is. My origin story as a free speech lawyer started in London, and I was remember Project Chinology, like when everyone was doing Rickrolling outside of churches of Scientology and things like that.
Vaguely.
2008. So it was a 4chan thing, ironically enough. And so we were all like dancing outside of a church of Scientology, listening to music. And this kid was wearing a Viennese, you know, he didn't get the memo, right, that you're supposed to wear a Guy Fawkes mask. And so he was wearing a Viennese ball mask and with a big nose on it. And so we called him Epic Nose Guy. An Epic Nose Guy was holding up a sign saying Scientology is a dangerous cult. And he received a criminal summons. He was a 16-year-old kid, and he received a criminal summons under the Public Order Act, Section 5 of the Public Order Act 1986.
Yikes.
For offending people with his speech. And he refused to accept the caution, so they summonsed him, and then he beat the summons because they dropped the charges. But like, I was there. I saw it happen, and I was like, what happened? He's like, well, my sign was offensive. And it said on it, Scientology is a dangerous cult. Objectively protected speech in the United States. I was in law school at the time. I was in my second year of law school, and I was so blown away, right, by the idea that holding up a sign like that could be criminal that I started on the journey, right? So it's funny. It's funny that the whole thing, it started with 4chan, right? And now here we are, full circle. Yep. And 4chan is at the center. Like the world is going to be saved by 4chan, right? That is not an understatement. Is that the 4chan case has, if we win here in the United States, and I think it's more likely when rather than if, but when we win, the 4chan case will have been a very significant factor in getting the United States government read up on the issue, understanding the scope and the scope and scale of the problem, and in addition to that, also inspiring the legislation that is now reportedly under consideration, and moreover, right, justifying the legislation as well. So I think it's funny, but when we write the histories of this particular time period of the internet, the 4chan case was in the background, right, playing a very important role. And the litigation's one thing, right, but the second and third order effects of the existence of the litigation and what people thought about it, right, and what they thought about the filings in it was also really important, because people were looking at it and they were saying, okay, they have been, I know this for a fact, they've been looking at what's going on and they've been following it and saying to themselves, okay, if this is what's going on with this one case, the first time Ofcom came out the gate, what happens, if they try to roll this out 100 more times against 100 other American companies? Yeah, of all things, 4chan. Yeah, of all things. But my personal story, right, as a free speech lawyer, started in law school with 4chan, and now it has come full circle where we are trying to rewrite the rules of the road for the internet with 4chan as the vehicle. So when I die, like, you'll just have to carve the 4chan clover on my headstone, right? And he was a beatard to the very end, and that's how it works. But essentially, yeah. What we're looking at now, though, is we're on the knife edge right now. Like, it will go one way or the other in the next 30 days, and which way it goes, right, depends entirely on the political will of the United States federal government. And my confidence in the US federal government, usually not very high. In this case, my confidence is very high indeed.
Due to the current administration, I'd imagine.
Personnel.
For me as well, by the way.
Personnel is policy. And their personnel on the executive side of the House, they've got some very, very, very sharp people getting underpaid in the federal government right now. Wow. And in Congress, they've got some very, very sharp people getting underpaid on staff, right? The real heroes, they're
I could argue you're a very sharp person doing this pro bono here. So.
That's true, but like there are the thing is, there are heroes everywhere right now. There are heroes in the State Department. There are heroes working for the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. There are the politicians. If they pull this off, if Eric Schmidt and Jim Jordan pull this off, they should be given the Medal of Freedom, because it would be without exaggeration, because this would be such a victory for free speech and such a structural reorganization of the internet. It almost can't be overstated how important.
You don't give yourself enough credit with the grand scheme of all this. I mean, it's good, but at the same time, like, don't forget yourself in all this too.
Look, I'm just doing my job. Like,
yeah, but you're doing it very well. I'll pat you on the back for you.
I mean, thank you, but like, I'm just doing Colin Crossman, right? So he took I'm a quarterback, right? Ron Coleman, essential. Let's talk about what the histories are going to say and talk about who's important, right? We'll give you your readers your listeners.
Well, yeah. Before you even get to that part, I was talking to my wife before I came in here for the stream. And I said, yeah, I'm going to have a lawyer on tonight. He's actually suing Ofcom, part of a foreign government. And he's doing it alongside my lawyer, Ron Coleman, who's representing me right now. And I did not know that Ron was going to be a part of this until after I started covering it. And I was like, what a small world it is when it comes down to it. But anyway, carry on.
So the story was, I was alone from February until August. I had a little bit of help from friends I can't name, who work in law firms and were kind of sounding boards. Ron came on in August, and that changed the game, right, completely, because it meant that we could start hitting back and we could start executing part of the strategy where we have live litigation that illustrates the nature of the dispute. Now, that has been used before, right, to get Congress off the plate, principally when Section 230 was enacted in 1996. Because in that case, there was a case called Stratton Oakmont versus Prodigy. Stratton Oakmont is in Wolf of Wall Street. Stratton Oakmont. They sued an early internet service provider called Prodigy for defamation for the speech of their users, and they won when a judge in New York, in New York State Supreme, ruled against them improperly and basically ignored the First Amendment. So what happened was Congress said, in order to protect the internet, we've got to stop this. Section 230 was the result. So the idea was to copy that, but not as an inadvertent consequence, but to do it as a strategy, right? Where we turn around and say, we're going to have the litigation live, and we're going to again, our clients have rights and defenses, and we're asserting those. But one side benefit of asserting those rights and defenses is that we could illustrate we could draw Ofcom out, right? We could say, okay, you know what? You're going to send all those emails. You know what? Come over here, have a conversation with us about our rules on our terms, and have that conversation in public. We want you to do that. And so that was part of our motivations, right? That made the case make sense to bring. And so, you know, and it's been a very important part of Congress's process and the process in the Beltway of people understand, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of people have read those documents in that case, right? And they've read Ofcom's documents that we posted on our website. So of those tens of thousands of people, I needed to find 10, right, who were positioned correctly, who understood the nature of the problem, and then were in a position to do something about it. And my suspicion is that we found those people. So Ron allowed that to happen, right? Fast forward to October, and I'm in New Hampshire talking with a guy named Calvin Beaulier, who's and another fellow named Keith Hammond. They're both representatives in the New Hampshire General Court. Keith, I think, is the number 4 Republican in the legislature up there in the House of Representatives. And they were like, "Hey, is there any?" I gave a talk about what was going on with Ofcom, and Calvin said to me, "Hey, is there something we can do? Like, is there a law we can pass?" And I said, "Actually, yeah, there is. Let me go home and write it up." Wrote it up over a few days, published it, sent it to them, put it on my website. Right? Nothing happens. 3 weeks later, I get an email or a DM actually from a guy named Colin Crossman. We followed each other on X for years. He'd just been promoted to Deputy Secretary of State in Wyoming. And he goes, "Hey, I read your blog post about the GRANITE Act, and I turned it into a bill called the Wyoming GRANITE Act."
Oh, so it was not provoked by you. They found it, and
he found it on his own, and he went and grinded on it for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And came up with the bill, and it was amazing. I mean, it took my initial bill concept was like pseudocode. It was crap. He turned it into a real fucking bill. And right now, the version we're working on now is even better than the one we published a couple of weeks ago. And he's been iterating on that for weeks. So I was the idea guy and laid out the skeleton. Colin took it and turned it into something incredible. We went straight to Congress and we said, "Hey, we got a bill," right? And I'm not going to tell you what they told me in response, but now they got a bill, right? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like they got 2 bills. So, and one of them we know is called the GRANITE Act, right? So where we went from was 1 became 2, became 3, right? With Colin. And so me, then Ron, then Colin, and with Calvin and Keith in the background working on the New Hampshire process. And Travis Corcoran is now also involved in the New Hampshire process. So we're going to have a New Hampshire bill. So between February 1st and November 1st, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who are doing 100% of the work.
Wow.
Then, and outside of Congress, and Congress is doing their own work. Then we go to Congress, we ship them a copy of the GRANITE Act, and now we learn 3 weeks later, right? States talking about it, right? Senate's talking about it, House is talking about it. And so
have you seen Elon Musk talk about it yet? Has he retweeted anything about it yet?
He retweeted a post of mine, which I was very flattered that he did.
Oh, nice.
Which is pretty cool. So about the GRANITE Act, to be blunt, there certainly would be some benefit. I mean, the GRANITE Act is designed for every American company.
Right.
It's not just like X would benefit from it just as much as a small internet forum would. So it's the kind of thing where it's certainly it's in his interest to do it, but it's in his interest to do it because it's in the interest of every American citizen for a bill like this to exist, or for a law like this to exist. And where we are now is, you know, I don't have any visibility into what's going on in the federal government, but given the noises that we're hearing and given the thing, my guess is that there are probably 2 or 3 dozen people now on the federal side of things who are taking, you know, the earlier work that was done and they're converting it into something which is a full fat, you know, federal proposal, which can be moved as a standalone bill or otherwise passed. And so now there's a very large number, and I don't know how many there are in the State Department working on probably a lot of that. My guess is there are people in the White House working on it. They are heroes too, right? Mm-hmm. Because there are a lot of people who have been working in the shadows, right? Looking at these problems for a year, and without them, you know, if we get the solution, we won't have gotten it without them. And so, you know, hopefully, you know, whoever decides to write the history of this, you know, we'll find out who they are and figure out what their contributions are. But they've been paying attention to it for months. And guys like Jim Jordan have been focused on it for months. Mm-hmm. And, you know, guys like Eric Schmidt, our free speech defenders, they've been focused on it for months. And so, you know, this particular problem. And so there are heroes everywhere, right? And it's a very small number of people. I'd say fewer than 50 in total. Wow. who in the private sector and in the U.S. government, and none of them, right, are big corporations, not a one. It's either solo practitioners or independent lawyers or government lawyers who are working on this. The big industry groups like NetChoice haven't been working on it. We did get some input from some of the free speech NGOs on the early drafts of the Wyoming GRANITE Act. I'm not going to say which free speech NGOs, but there's some of the bigger ones. So it's been one of those things where it started small and it's been snowballing, right? Because a year ago, no one thought this thing could be beaten. Now everyone's pretty convinced. If we pull the right lever, we can beat this.
Well, you said, let me back up just a little bit though, because you said it was on the knife's edge with this, could go either way.
It could.
And I believe you for sure. Why would it not be approved? Like, what? It sounds so obvious. What that like the granite.
If it gets filibustered by a Democrat,
would that be, I don't know, anti-American? Like, it's not like, why would someone not be okay with that unless you are working for an other government?
I think you could. There are people in Congress who, there was a hearing that happened in the beginning of September or late August where Nigel Farage went to talk to the House Judiciary Committee, and the entire Democrat side of the aisle gave him a really hard time. And why are we talking about free speech in England when we should be talking about free speech in Russia or free speech in North Korea and free speech in China? And I think the answer to that is, well, we know that Russia and China and North Korea are totalitarian hellholes.
Mm-hmm.
England's not supposed to be one too, right? So, that's the answer. That's the simple answer to that question,
right?
But rather, they were not aware of the threat to American free speech that our own allies pose, and they were dismissing, right, legitimate and frankly legally correct concerns about the state of free speech in places like the UK and France and Germany and others, because their political allies in those places, right, don't want us to have that conversation here. So it is entirely possible that a bill gets proposed, it gets moved, and it gets filibustered.
If it gets filibustered, I would demand an investigation immediately on the individuals that are trying to stop it.
I mean, that's above my pay grade, right? I'm not a political critter. I'm just a lawyer. But that would be the principal risk, is that it gets filibustered along the way. However, right, I think that it would be politically radioactive for someone to filibuster it.
Right.
That's it. This is kind of one of those things that shouldn't be a very difficult call for most legislators to make. And so
it's protecting an American. It's like, why would you not want to protect?
It's not protecting an American. It's protecting every American.
Right.
So it's everybody benefits from this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's protecting all of us, right? And just because, and I think the way that they would frame it, right, is they'd say, well, you've got these politically radioactive websites. They're right wing. They're dangerous. They're this. They're that. And it's that's the whole point about free speech. You're always defending the scoundrels, right? Because the scoundrels are the ones who they go after first, and that's where you find the fight. That's where the fight is. And if you lose the fight with the scoundrels, before you know it, you're getting jailed for edgy social media posts. And that's what happened in England, right? They've had this slippery slope for 30 years. So from I think that's the main risk, right? Is that you don't have, is that you get some type of political pushback from someone who's particularly cozy with the Europeans. Mm-hmm. We know that Barack Obama is particularly cozy with the Europeans. We know that Hillary Clinton was particularly cozy with the Europeans in each case on the subject of internet censorship and how they thought the internet should be run. So there's a real risk.
The World Economic Forum. Excuse me.
WEF is a stupid. I mean, I'm not a big WEF conspiracy nut, because it's just it's a stupid conference racket for people who work at corporations to feel like they're special and exclusive with other people who also work at large corporations. You don't tend to get a lot of really, how should we put it? You don't get a lot of tough as nails startup founders or independent people who do interesting things independently.
I'd agree with that. It just feels like it always seems to go back to that, and that's
they invite all of the swamp monsters to go hang out with them, and so that's where you find them, right? But it's not like, I don't think correlation is not necessarily causation, right? In this, and I think WEF is just a place where you get people who really like institutions hanging out, and people who really like institutions don't tend to be maverick individualist radicals, right? Who think that individual rights are important, otherwise that they should live free or die, because those kinds of people don't.
Hey, that's New Hampshire right there.
Live free or die, man. Like,
Let's go, baby.
Exactly. So
I'm from Massachusetts, so I'm very familiar with you.
Massachusetts. I'm hanging up. This is outrageous.
Come on.
Good night, everyone. See you later. That's Massachusetts. Why did you tell me that? No, I'm kidding.
Well, because we wouldn't have had this conversation. Probably.
But yeah. So long story short, though, I mean, where we are is we're in a very interesting. This is the first conversation I've had on the topic in some time. About 2-3 weeks. And
was that London Journal was your other one? I
did London about a month ago.
Okay.
And then did a couple of Bitcoin oriented ones. Galaxy. I have friends who run the Bitcoin. What is it called? PubKey and Galaxy Digital's podcast, and that's very crypto focused. But those are just buddies who have podcasts, so I just decided to hop on and do them. But really, and at the time I was kind of planting flags. I was like, okay, we're going to win. I think we're going to win. I had a hint that some of this might be coming. Now I really have genuinely no hint what their schedule is. But where we are now is we're on the knife edge, right? Now, I suspect that they're farther along even than I think they are. Where my internal sense of like, okay, here's the destination and I think they're there. I think they might be here. Right. But I don't know. Right. That is my sense. And if we are in fact over the knife edge and we've got the political momentum and we can get this done quickly, then it'll be over by the time this is over, right? Like it'll be over before anyone even realizes it's over.
It'll just happen in a snap.
And it will just happen. And then what will happen is it's going to take time for people to figure out the significance of what's just happened, because it will be, if they manage to get it done quickly, there won't be a whole lot of lead time. It's just going to happen, right? And then we'll wake up one day and there will be a new rule book, but no one will understand the rules, right? Except for a handful of people who wrote them. And so that's, and then we'll have to adjust and adapt, and the world will be different and things will change. And Americans won't get these letters anymore. And if they do get those letters, if the UK sends one of these letters into the United States, again, after we get if we got the GRANITE Act tomorrow, just for sake of argument, if we got it tomorrow, and then the day after tomorrow, the UK sent a letter into the United States, I could have a lawsuit on file within 24 hours, right? Because it's all.
Can the UK claim ignorance? Say we didn't know that it passed. Can you?
Ignorantia juris non excusat. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. So no.
Even if you're in another country.
Even if you're in another country, ignorantia juris non excusat. So that's one of my favorite legal Latin maxims.
That's a good one.
So yeah, it's a good one. So, and of course,
it flies in the face of mine that is ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But no, I think if it happens quickly, it'll be over before anyone realizes it's over. The people who will realize it's over first will be very senior policy wonks. So it'll feel like the issue just kind of went away, because what will happen is a lot of very senior policy wonks will figure it out immediately, right? In London, like I have colleagues in London who are my absolute like ideological enemies on this issue, right? One of them is a guy his name is Jonathan Hall KC. He occupies a very sensitive government position in that he's the independent reviewer of their terrorism legislation. Right? He's a very eminent barrister, and he's responsible for providing official opinions to the government on the relative merits of their online safety and terrorism and various other laws. And he's very much like a British institutionalist. He and I get along great. Like we're on completely opposite sides of the issue, and we've had a very nice correspondence back and forth. And I suspect when this is all over, I'll probably go fly over to London and take him out to lunch or something.
I've noticed that's kind of a different world with lawyers. I've noticed lawyers are able to do that more than everyone else.
And even the opposing counsel on the 4chan case, that case, he actually has some really interesting writings that he's done. Obviously, I figured out who he was. Right? I was like, who is this guy? He's done some really interesting writing on the First Amendment. And I suspect that like we'd actually have a very interesting conversation about all this stuff when the case is over. Right.
Yep. So
you can't, with lawyers, like sometimes you're on the same side, sometimes you're against each other. Generally speaking, like you don't take it too personally. So it's, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and that's okay. So With the legal community, right? Like I readily expect that the London legal community, I'm going to be able to have some very interesting conversations with interesting people when this is all done.
Mhm.
In terms of like Whitehall, right, which is their civil service, or Ofcom, right? I don't think I'm ever going to have a friend at Ofcom or in Whitehall ever again.
I
Right?
got a feeling if this goes the way we think it will, Ofcom is going to probably eventually disband into something else because it seems like it's on a collision course to.
They have a wider remit than just the internet.
I
So
understand that. It just feels like it's off the rails right now with what they're doing. It just feels.
I don't know if they
No.
feel that way, but I don't want to talk about the other side in the case.
True. Fair.
But what I will say is that the lawyers, at least, everybody's being pretty stoic and detached about it. And like Jonathan Hall and I could not disagree more, right, on the future, on what we think are the future visions, right, for the UK's regulation of the internet and freedom of speech there. But you respect the guy because he's a practitioner just like you. He's frankly, in his particular domain, he's a hell of a lot better lawyer than I am. My domain, maybe we're on par. I don't know. But but it's one of those things where you have a lot of respect for these guys. And so when it's all over, right, there's going to be a small group, I would say probably when this is done, right, there will be maybe 20 to 30 people on the planet who will really fully understand the implications. Initially, right. And they will be clustered very tightly in elite, barristers' chambers in London, in places like Brussels, places like DC, and maybe a handful of general counsels at the very, very biggest tech companies that deal with this stuff on a daily basis, right? It will take months for this to percolate out and for practices to change and for the knowledge and understanding of the consequences of what this is, right, to gradually percolate out into the legal community at large, and for people, assuming we do it, right, which is of course still an open question. But if we do it, it'll take a little time for it to adjust, and I think for most people on the internet, their experience will change subtly, right? So what will happen is some UK internet users will no longer have content blocked. Some American users will notice that they're having more interactions with UK users because their content isn't being picked up by content filters for those platforms that have chosen, right, to avail themselves of the protections of the shield and made the business decision to do so. Companies like Imgur, right, might turn around and saying, you know what, now we're going to restore access to the UK. So you're going to have more flow of ideas. So it won't really be noticeable to the average American internet user who largely exists in this non-age verified, non-uncensored sandbox, except that they're going to have more interface, more interaction with people who are otherwise behind the wall. As companies adjust, change their policies, change the parameters on their automated moderation tools to what makes business sense while doing a modicum of voluntary compliance in those jurisdictions. So it's not going to change a whole lot for us. I think it'll change a lot for people in Europe, and it's definitely going to change a lot for people in the UK and also for people in Australia. If large internet companies, if we get a shield, and if they then avail themselves of that shield, you could have an Australian social media ban. Let's say for Instagram, right, is one of the targets for that ban. Instagram could turn around and go, okay, well, we got the shield law, so we're lifting the shield up, and if you come after us, we're going to sue you. In that case, there will be a very direct, real, and immediate consequence for someone who's an Instagram user who was age gated out of the site and then suddenly has the ability to use the site again. But they're not going to connect all the dots and identify that this new American law, any more than your average internet user of the podcast platform we're using, or of YouTube or of X, really feels the daily impact of Section 230, even though it's pervasive in everything that they do, right? It's it's inherent to the experience. And it's something which changes the baseline assumptions about how the platform operates.
Which I could argue Section 230 needs to be reformed the way it is. Anyway.
I will not hear you slander the good name of Section 230. Which Section 230 is amazing. Once you get like your 50th demand of some arrogant jerk, right, saying, well, I want this content removed because I don't like it and I'm going to sue you. And you look at them and you go, okay, go ahead. like be my guest. You really want it. You want to go spend all that money, and we'll see you in court. And we'll get it dismissed on a 12b6 and like sayonara, right? So that's the kind of thing where you can
I guess I mean it from the perspective of how YouTube treats it with its creators and stuff. But that's
Well, yeah, I get YouTube, but like part of what YouTube does with its creators is driven by these offshore regulations because it's easier for them to harmonize to the offshore stuff rather than running two separate teams with two separate sets of priorities and two separate rule books.
which is the concern for the global internet, which is
Right.
what we're talking about right now. Is
Well,
is,
right.
I
but
think,
if we can defang
Mhm.
those foreign rule books, right, effectively, if we can turn around and say, okay, this European rule no longer applies to Meta, YouTube, or YouTube's part of Google, I suppose, or Alphabet as it is now known. If we can say to them, listen, rule book doesn't apply to you anymore. Don't have to follow it. They're going to change their domestic rules in the United States in order to account for that, because all of a sudden that external constraint is no longer one that they have.
that'd
So
be a radical change from what they've
it
been
would be
doing.
an enormous change. And
Yeah.
there was a policy document that was going around back in 2018. I wish I could find it. I've looked for it everywhere. Where Google basically said there are two sets of norms. There are the American norms and there are the European free speech norms. And our policy as a company is going to be to adhere to the European free speech norms.
The lowest common denominator.
Right. We're going to go to the lowest common denominator. We're going to harmonize across the board. So I think a lot of the problem we see with American brand safety and all that shit, that's just like a commercial version of what the Europeans do from a regulatory perspective, right? But in the United States, the sovereign can't do it. So you have because of the Constitution. So you have lots of private entities that do it instead. So it's one of those things where
Going global actually hurt the freedoms of America.
going global hurt the freedoms of America. And by putting up a shield that confirms, right, that we actually have the First Amendment right online, and if you dare touch it, European state, you're going to have a big problem in your hands. That will have an impact, I think, on domestic American speech, because those platforms will no longer have to harmonize to the European approach. They will now be able to consider, is it actually better for our business to be a little more anarchic, right? At the moment, it's not, because the Europeans will come in and they'll say, we're going to give you a 6% of your global turnover fine, which for Google is a titanic amount of money. So they comply with the rules. They try not to be the slowest gazelle, right? Because they can always rely on X to be the slowest gazelle in the censorship race. And so they turn around and they try to they play for time. They try to buy extra time. They assume that some level of fines is going to be a cost of doing business. And they play the game, right? If we pass the GRANITE Act, if Congress takes what we wrote and they turn that into a federal law, there is no game to be played, right? The only game to be played is that Europe loses and America wins.
You're getting me excited here.
Well, it's, to be honest with you, I'm kind of excited. It's hard to, when you're in the middle of it, right? When you're right in the middle of everything, it's difficult to. I mean, I live in Connecticut, right? I live in Connecticut in a small seaside community, and it's kind of crazy to think. And then I look at my web analytics, right? And everything that I put up is getting read from all over the world. And I know that all of those, it's all in policy shops and things like that, places where, places where people make decisions. They're now looking at the American process, and I think in England in particular, they're realizing that a guy who they thought was a bit of a crank, who liked doing podcasts and did the occasional GB News experience, just outplayed them, right? Because I think that there's a bit of recalibration going on.
Didn't see that coming.
Because right, they're like, well, hold on a sec, wait, what? So you wrote a blog post and the State Department's talking what?
I'm telling you, this sounds like the plot to a movie.
It would make a very boring movie because it mostly.
I don't know. I mean,
well,
yes
like,
and no.
What's it gonna show? It's gonna show me sitting at my desk shit posting. Like that's basically what it's shit.
I don't know. I just
writing
started watching Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. We could do Preston Byrne Vampire Hunter. We could make it interesting.
Yeah, right. Preston Byrne Vampire Hunter. I like that. No, I think but anyway, I digress. But it's definitely an interesting time to be alive. It's a great time to be in the middle of this swirling morass of international intrigue, and to have your case being mentioned, by an undersecretary of state on a diplomatic junket to London, and it's just amazing.
And getting retweeted by Elon Musk,
and getting retweeted by Elon,
and I'm sure Donald Trump having conversations with people about it.
The conversations are definitely. He was actually he got a question about it at a presser today.
Oh, really?
And he said, it's absolutely terrible what's going on to Elon. I don't like that one bit. It's terrible. I haven't spoken to him about it, but I'm going to get a report on it later, and we're gonna figure out what's going on. And it's like, okay, cool. Like,
pretty good Trump, by the way.
Was it? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, pretty good.
But he's right? So like he just said it in a press conference that he's been briefed. So you know that the conversation's happening somewhere in DC.
Yeah.
But like, I'm not privy to any of it, right? It's just that I'm looking because I'm so close to it. I'm trying to read the tea leaves, right? And seeing what you can deduce from the public statements that are being made and the fact that anyone's talking about it at all, right? And talking about it in the terms in which they're talking about it. I look at that and I say, okay, this sounds like an administration which is really determined to stop this.
Yeah.
But of course I don't know, right? Because I'm not involved in that process. But yeah, it's totally fascinating. I expect we're probably going to know sooner rather than later how Congress plans to address this and deal with it. And I think the most high probability path is that there will be hearings, there'll be a bill, there'll be a vote, but I don't know when that might happen or how it might happen or who's going to be authoring the bills or what it's going to be called or what provisions they're going to contain. But I'm optimistic, right? I hope that we get a really robust statutory shield that protects Americans from foreign interference with their civil rights. I hope that it disapplies sovereign immunity from foreign states. I hope that it allows people to sue for absolutely titanic quantities of damages, and I hope that we reinforce our perimeter here in the United States. And
this is the next digital age of war right now. It's
a digital Cold War. It's
yeah,
a digital Cold War. Yeah.
And now let's assume the worst. Assume Congress is Congress, filibusters and doesn't do shit. Where does that leave you with 4chan and Kiwi Farms right now? You can still tell them to go pound sand. That doesn't change anything. They can't enforce anything, right?
Yep. Correct.
Okay.
So it's what it means is that resistance will be if Congress doesn't act and if we don't get a big, robust statutory shield. It means that most platforms will obey. The big ones in particular.
Mm-hmm.
There will probably be some platforms who refuse and they either cut off Europe or ban Europe. There will be a splinter net. The Europeans will focus their efforts on resistors and they will attempt to intimidate them and push them and force them to comply. They will issue.
Now, to be clear, when you say Europeans, you're speaking Australia, Europe, UK, right?
Yeah, foreign types.
Yeah.
There's America.
It's going to turn into North Korea, China, Russia, and those.
North Korea, China, Russia are what they are, right?
Yeah.
Like they are what they are, and there's nothing we can do about it. So this is like allied states, right? The allies of the United States, and really, this is an intra-alliance conflict between the United States and its vassals, to be blunt. And the vassals have decided they want to go one way, and the United States says, no, we don't want you to go that way. And the question is, which one of those approaches will win? So if that happens, if Congress doesn't move, what you have is a series of individualized stalemates, and you have huge, sustained European, UK, and Australian pressure on our markets and on our businesses, which will be very difficult for a big multinational to repulse. So that is what will happen, is that you'll get a lot of compliance from the bigger ones. You'll get a lot of resistance from the smaller ones. There'll be a lot of harassment. I'll be doing a lot of pro bono work. If you have the shield bill and it's a shield, but it doesn't have a sword, then you will still have sustained pressure, right? You will have occasional lawsuits, but you will not have really very effective deterrence. And so there will still be stuff that comes in. When that comes in, it will become a diplomatic matter between the United States and its allies, and it'll have to be dealt with by the government because the courts are not necessarily ineffective. I think we can use them effectively, but it's a suboptimal route for addressing the problem. If we get
it kicks the can down the road. It turns it into
it kicks the can down the road, and it means it places the burden of enforcing America's perimeter on American citizens, which is not where it should be. Right. American citizens and American pro bono lawyers like me should not. It makes no strategic sense to have us be the guardians of the border.
The government should have the best interest of its citizens.
And the government should do something that works, right? And if you have the full fat shield, where anytime a foreign censor touches the United States, you've got a potential $75 million reward. I want Quinn Emanuel all over that shit. And Quinn Emanuel's, they're Elon Musk lawyers. Alex Spiro, I think, is Quinn Emanuel. And they're absolutely diehard, aggressive litigators that are in the business of doing profitable commercial litigation. I want that to be the case. what we're doing with 4chan, right, for example, we're not seeking damages in that case. We're seeking a declaratory order, right? So that's not the kind of thing where you usually will want to invest a lot of money in lawyering, and it's not something that any lawyer is going to want to take on contingency. So it's not a case. It's not the kind, which is why I could only find one lawyer in the United States who was willing to help me with it, and that was Ron Coleman, because Ron is immensely principled. And he is one of the finest First Amendment lawyers in the United States, and he understands, right? He understands the importance of doing this, and that's why he did it. So so from that point of view, the middle of the road is not ideal, because what you're doing is you're basically saying you have a bunch of cases. It makes very little commercial sense to fight. You'd have to fight on principle, and for the likely targets of those rules, at least the early targets, you're going to have to fight pro bono. Because you're not, Kiwi Farms is not going to be paying multi-million-dollar legal bills to do multi-year federal trials or multi-year federal cases.
Right.
So that's just how it goes. Then you get the full fat approach, right? And it suddenly becomes profitable for a law firm to pick this up and do the lawsuit. So you have a business case which you can sell to your management committee, regardless of what the politics are, right? Because you can say, well, hey, we can go make $25 million for the partnership on this case. Guess what? Every law firm in the United States is going to take that deal.
We'll take that. Yeah.
Yeah. The deck is stacked in our favor. Our client is immune from enforcement, and the damages are titanic. Every law firm in the U.S. will do that. And as a result, there will be no cases. Because it's the way that things currently work is that it's heads I win, tails you lose. If you go over to the UK, like Wikipedia did, and you try to challenge their process in accordance with their rules and their procedure under their law, because they don't have free speech or any respect for it, you can make all the free speech arguments you want. You're going to lose. It's suicidal to bring the law.
Well, they have free speech. It's just whatever they decide
they don't have free speech. That's not free speech, right?
No, I know. I'm joking.
Yeah. So and then if you're in the U.S., right, you're stuck with doing very, very narrow, declaratory judgment actions where there are no financial penalties. And so it's in the interests of the attacker, right? They can send Ofcom can send all of the notices they want to the United States. If they wanted to, they could go send an email to every single technology company in the United States, threatening them with fines, demanding compliance. And it would cost them exactly nothing to do it, right? Yep. We need to make that decision extremely expensive. And that is what this is about. It's about changing the mathematics. There's a documentary about Robert McNamara, who was JFK and later LBJ's Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, and he talked about his experience with Curtis LeMay during the Second World War. He was a quantitative analyst working for the Army Air Corps, and Curtis LeMay, when he was bombing Japan, looked at it, and he basically said, we have to calculate this in efficiency terms. So what we do is we look at losses per unit of target destruction. Assume that you can make as many B-29s as you want, right, within reason. And then you say the objective is the destruction of the target. And then what you do is you optimize your strategy, right, in order to destroy the target with minimum losses. If you do a bombing run of the target and you destroy 20% of it and so you have to do 5 runs to hit it, and you're losing 2 planes per run, right? Then what you're going to do is you're going to lose 10 planes, and it's going to take you 5 different sorties in order to destroy it. If, however, you drop the planes down to 5,000 feet, you go after the same target, you lose 5 planes in 1 run, right? But you destroy 100% of the target. Well, your losses per unit of target destruction are better, right? From a mathematical perspective, if you do it the second way, even though it appears, right, that you're losing
worse at the beginning.
Right? Yeah. And it's worse in the beginning. And so it's the same thing, right? We have legal fees per unit of censorship deterred, right? And so at the moment, the math massively benefits the attacker, because Ofcom can do all the censorship it wants. It costs them nothing. You can do all the defense you want. You gain nothing, right? You gain very little out of that. So from that perspective, the math favors the attacker and does not favor the defender. But the reason it doesn't favor the defender is because it's a self-imposed constraint by American law on foreign sovereign immunity. So we said, listen, get rid of it. Get rid of sovereign immunity, create a cause of action, and flip the math so that all of a sudden the outbound notice is what's expensive, right? And the response from an entity that's received the outbound notice costs nothing, right?
So basically, it's the end of, what was it, Lethal Weapon, the first one? Diplomatic immunity?
I haven't diplomatic. Yeah. It's just been revoked. Right, sovereign immunity. It's just been revoked. That's the idea, right? Is that basically we flip the math on its head. so that it becomes massively inefficient for an agency like Ofcom to enter the United States, and massively efficient and easy for an American who then receives that notice to go start imposing costs on the other side immediately in the terms of defense costs. And then that's before even damages, right? So they want to regulate 250,000 internet companies. 100,000 of those, assume just 100,000, I think it's probably more. Assume 100,000 of those are US based, right? And assume a full federal trial costs $1 million. Automatically, right off the bat, if they want to enforce that law perfectly, it's going to cost them $100 billion to do it, which is something like 5% of the UK's GDP. Done. They can't do it, right? And particularly given their budget. Even I think their entire budget for setting up the Online Safety Act enforcement scheme so far was $300 or $400 million. So that's,
and how would that be recuperated though? Because they're over there. Would it be tariffs, or would it be things that they already have over here? How would they even?
So the way that we structured it, and I don't know if Congress is going to do it this way, but the way that we structured it is that the sovereign, the state itself, the agency, and any individual working for it are jointly and severally liable. That means that they're all liable for all of it, or any part of it that has yet to be paid. And so that means that what happens is these countries have huge quantities of assets custodied in the American banking system, particularly in the Federal Reserve banks particularly the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which they need in order to facilitate forex trading in their currencies. So So essentially, it's holding those piles of cash and assets and treasuries hostage by saying, if you censor, right, then the American will be able to go after your assets, right, because those are suddenly recoverable. And so that's the theory, is that they won't attempt to make any incursions into the United States because they can't afford to lose those assets, and they can't afford to repatriate them either. Right? If they bring them back to the UK, they're no good because the forex market is here. And none of these countries that are trying to project in, right, have a robust enough financial center where they could turn around and say, we can ignore New York now, right? So that's particularly if you have to interface with dollars, which they do, in order to engage in international trade, which is not euro denominated and is not sterling denominated, it is dollar denominated. So
I don't see America doing this shit to them, by the way. That's the other thing. Oh. We're not going over there and being like, hey, you need to not allow this for this website. We don't give a shit.
Correct. We don't tell them what they can and can't host. Right. And if there is cross-border action, there are treaties for that, like with IP and copyright and things like that. There are treaties which deal with all that. Right. So they're voluntary participants. So from our point of view, the defensive shield is basically just reasserting the position from 12 months ago, right? Which is that foreign laws don't apply in the United States. Just because these three big foreign sovereigns made the collective decision that they did apply in the United States, and they all did it at the same time, doesn't mean that we have to respect that decision here in the United States.
Fair.
And if they wouldn't back off they have been asked 100 different ways, right? Please stop. Please stop. Please don't do this. Don't do this. There are going to be trade consequences. No, don't censor Americans. Please don't do it. We've told you not to do it. Donald Trump at Turnberry in July to Keir Starmer's face. Don't censor my website. That would be bad. In July also, White House, it reported in the Telegraph, warned the UK, don't do this. They've been warned all year, right? We've run out of patience, right? Warnings. And I personally run out of patience with this shit. Right. With this Australian letter that came in earlier today, I talked to the client. I was like, what do you want me to do? He's like, just fuck these people. We're so tired of hearing from them. Just tell them to go away. And I was like,
I can relate to that in my own personal life with lawsuits. Well, let me, we've been talking for forever. I thought this was going to be 20 minutes. This is going on for a while. Not that I'm complaining, but I know your time is extremely important.
Yeah, I should probably hit the sack. So
I know. And it's really late there. We have a bunch of questions from people. Do you mind if we just run through those really quick for you? Because I hate to ignore them. Jay Viper for the 5 says, Smash talking to a lawyer? Isn't this a little on the nose? Yes, that's me. I never thought I'd be a law channel. Look at me go.
So question for the lawyer. What do you have to say about the state level stuff? Well, that's where I operate, the state level stuff. And I've been quarterbacking with Colin Crossman of Wyoming, the state level stuff. So what do I have to say about it? Wyoming's moving. That is my suspicion is that will be introduced and voted on this session. I can't confirm that. I don't know what their internal process is, but my suspicion is there's going to be a lot of buy-in there. New Hampshire is also moving. And my suspicion is that we're going to get that this session too. So watch that space. But I think we're going to get some movement on both of those things very, very shortly.
Okay. Real wandering slacker for the two. Trump should make the Department of Digital War.
I like that.
I like that too.
I like that. I'll mention it next time I see him.
That's actually really awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever met Trump, by the way?
No.
Oh, you will.
I
You
wish.
will.
Oh,
No, you
maybe.
will. On this path, you will. Just keep doing what you're doing. You will. Comchi for the 5. Fearing the Censorship and Online Safety Act exploits that having real negative impact at the UK. Is there any way to help out since I can only do repost?
Join the Free Speech Union. Join the UK Free Speech Union. They're the tip of the spear over there. They're run by good people. I'm actually on the Legal Advisory Council of the Free Speech Union in the UK. And so that is the organization that will be. The Online Safety Act is not going to survive the next election. If reform gets in, it's done. And the Free Speech Union will be writing the rule book, or helping to write the rule book, I think, for the rules of the road for what happens next. So, or they'll be influencing it, certainly. So yeah, join the Free Speech Union. That's what I recommend.
Kurgan, member for 2 months. You know, if Harris had won, she would have given us all up to this.
Yep. Yeah, no argument for me.
I really like the people that hate Trump so much and think he's the worst thing in the world. I don't think they realize what was really at stake behind the scenes, what was happening. Like,
Yeah.
it's almost like you're welcome as we're getting slapped in the face, saving their lives. Real wandering slacker at Smash. Ask how this is different from GDPR and COPPA. The government bowed to these. Why wouldn't they to this?
Yeah. So the GRANITE Act, as we've written it, would actually invalidate large chunks of the GDPR, including the cookie consent pop-up that keeps coming up. So it would kill that, for example. So I think that if the GRANITE Act that we proposed in Wyoming gets substantially adopted by Congress, a lot of the GDPR goes away. And ultimately, the GDPR is a foreign regulatory regime, which is only enforceable in Europe because it's not enforceable in the US, because foreign fines, regulatory fines, are not enforceable here as void for public policy. So the industry rolled over to the GDPR. As an American, you do not need to comply with the GDPR. Most American companies do, right? Because you have similar data protection requirements here in the United States. So what you do is nobody died for the GDPR, right? Nobody fought a war over consumer data protection. And generally speaking, companies want to protect their users' data, right? It's good for business. So I think GDPR is one of those things where it's a slightly onerous regulation, which is something that a company would want to do anyway in a lot of cases. And so they all comply with it, but it doesn't touch, a core First Amendment right, except in some areas, like with the cookie consents. So I suspect that that if we manage to get something like this over the line in Congress, then a lot of the GDPR is going to be challengeable, and so I think you'll probably see a lot of it go away.
And then real wandering slacker for the 5. Somehow I knocked Lisa off as the top poster. Fist bump Lisa. And thanks, Smash, for having this guy on. It's been a good chat. Cheers. Matcha tea. Do you still drink wine? Yes, I actually already had half a bottle of wine at dinner tonight with the wife, so I moved on to tea for this conversation.
How are you still standing?
My body is very used to half a bottle of wine every night, so. Real wandering slacker for the 20. Here's to the Struggle Bus Monday. You going to hit tier 1? Cheers. On a random note, been playing Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy X-2, and holy crap, playing them as an adult, I'm realizing they are heavily sexualized. Not sure how I missed this as a teenager. Preston, do you play any video games? Cheers.
Chin chin. So I've got a Diet Coke here, which is the breakfast of champions. I do not play video games. I was a very, very diehard Halo player in college, but I have not played video games. I haven't played video games, nor have I watched television since 2005. So yeah,
You read a lot of books.
I got a lot of books.
Yeah.
So
You watch movies with the wife, at least, right?
of course,
There you go.
of course.
Yo for the
Our
5.
state's trying to do similar censorship laws. Rephrase. Yeah, no, we're gonna go beat those too.
There we go.
You wait.
And then we got back-to-back 10 membership banger from Shadow Walker and EB. Shout out to you guys. I'll play the videos after Preston goes. I'm not going to make him sit through those, but Preston, I have no further questions, Your Honor. Holy crap, this was an incredible conversation.
Well, I mean, you're hearing it. The funny thing is, like, this is going to be a big issue. You're hearing it first. So
yeah, no, I know. I've been covering this for a while, like not since day one. I don't want to act like that because you've been doing this far longer than I have.
You've been doing it for a while. You were there early.
Yeah, and I knew when I first started talking about this, I was like, this is big. What's going on right now? And I feel like it's really important to get the word out to at least let people know what the hell's happening out there. I think it's very important.
When it's all over, after we win, I'll come back on and we'll have
that would be wonderful. That would be,
and we'll have some very interesting conversations.
Oh, I'm sure you have a lot that you're holding back.
There's a lot that's not being said, but after we win, we can have a little chit chat.
I like that approach.
Awesome. All right, I got to hit the sack.
Preston, thank you so much again, man. I really appreciate it, and best of luck to you in the future with all this fighting against these ridiculous people.
I'll catch you over on X.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Later. Bye.
Bye. Woo, that was amazing. Wow. I thought he messaged me. He's like, yeah, I got about 20 minutes. 2 hours later. that was awesome. Wow. One of the best conversations I've had on this channel since we started it. We've done a lot of these, but that one was a banger. That was super insightful, super casual, just very chill, and being on the cusp of a potential massive change in the dichotomy of human civilization online. Like this, what he's doing right now. Wow. it's surreal. It's really surreal.